Growing up in the early 90s, I'd watch repeats of the very flamboyant 1960s Batman series on Channel 4. Of course, that's in the UK. I'd come home from judo on a Sunday and it would be on TV soon after. Comic book in style, and until Batman Forever came along in the 90s, this was how Batman once was. Very camp. Comic book camera angles and very likely actors who were out their minds whilst filming. Then came along something dark and sinister looking, of course Tim Burton's Batman, an absolute culture shock of what I was used to watching originally. The new Batmobile in itself was odd looking but super impressive at the same time. This Tim Burton masterpiece featured Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne aka Batman, Jack Nicholson as Jack Napier aka the Joker, and finally Kim Basinger as Vicky Vale. Personally, this is my all-time favourite Batman film, right next to Batman Returns, also by Tim Burton. An awesome cast which in my opinion has never been beaten, regardless of what people might say about the Christopher Nolan trilogy. It likely is a nostalgic thing. My dad bought this on VHS when it released and I remember watching it at home for the first time. I remember the hype around this film too. It even featured a soundtrack from Prince. The days when original motion picture soundtracks were something as big as the film itself. So in terms of games, Ocean released Batman the movie for multiple computers at the time. The C64 version was the version I played a hell of a lot of back in the day. This was on the Hit Squad label. It's one of those games that I would come back to again and again. It's also one of the only games I ever completed for the Commodore 64 back in the day. The Ocean releases were pretty much the same game, all with different qualities, which we will take a look at in this video. We also had various other console versions by Sunsoft, which are all very different from each other, each of which we'll also take a look at. There really is some cracking games in this video. Finally, Atari released an arcade game of Batman, which was again very different from everything else too. So today we are ranking from worst to best the Ocean versions of Batman the movie and determine which one was the best version. We're going to start with the 8-bit releases and conclude this video with the 16-bit versions, so essentially a double ranking video today. We'll also take a look at the other Batman games for consoles outside of the main Ocean rankings, as some of these, although nothing like the Ocean releases, were too good not to include. And this video is based around the games of the film, of course, so we're not going to be looking at Batman the Caped Crusader or any other releases. First up on this list is the MSX release. Now, it is highly likely that the MSX got the ZX Spectrum version here. In other words, a lazy Spectrum to MSX port of Batman. It normally is the case with British MSX games that we got the worst of the bunch compared with Japanese releases. This is what I generally find during this series of videos that I'm doing. So the game itself is very cut back with no music at all, and the sound effects, which are very poor here. Scrolling action isn't actually that bad though, really. Not much going wrong here in terms of frame drops. Batman controls really well here, climbing ladders, elevating to higher levels, and swinging from platforms. Performs pretty good here too. I have seen much worse for the MSX. This one really isn't as bad as other games which are converted from different ZX Spectrum games, despite its lack of music, that is. Music is particularly needed in this version to disguise the horrendous sound of the Batmobile once we finish the chemical plant stage. Overall, this version of Batman is a very slow to pace version compared with others, but not overly extremely terrible. Now, if we take a look at the ZX Spectrum 128K versions of Batman the movie, you will see exactly what I mean when comparing this with the MSX version. Same monochrome colours, although they do look brighter on the Spectrum. The same yellow border going on too. It's literally the same game, but the ZX Spectrum did it much better. We also have music and much superior sound effects here too. The platforming stages of this game are fairly long, and if you are new to this game, you'll likely get lost very quickly, especially in the Axis chemical plant. It's pretty much built like a maze, that is. Over the years of playing it, I have from memory mastered it right to the part of taking down Jack Napier at the end of this stage. As the platforming stages are long, it is much better to play this at this kind of pace. Although similar to the MSX's version, Spectrum's version wasn't as pixelated and the sprites here look much better for it too. It's a solid 8-bit computer version of Batman the movie. The Amstrad's version of Batman the movie wasn't a bad one at all. We have very good music here as well as sound effects, which in particular sounds better than the sound effects being generated from the Spectrum's version. My only criticism really of this version is really how Batman walks here. It does look very peculiar. Almost like there were two sprites used here, one for his top half and one for his bottom half, and then put together in the wrong way, where his little legs are going like a good one, but his top half doesn't seem to match the same motion as his legs. Push that aside, we have a nicely detailed 8-bit game here, and responsive gameplay with good scoring action too. Controls are really nice to use, no issues with swinging from platforms. The Batmobile on stage 2 is a nightmare to swing around corners, as per usual with this game. After playing all of the 8-bit micro versions, although they were largely decent playable games, each one had a drawback in its own right. The Commodore 64 also had a couple of drawbacks, which is why it was difficult to place this one as my favourite 8-bit version. I am not clouded by nostalgia, as this is the version I played a lot of as a kid, but if we were firstly to consider Batman the sprite itself here, it's miles ahead of the other versions in this video so far, and he also walks properly here too, compared to the CPC's version. The game is presented in a full screen, and although the colours here aren't as vibrant as Amstrad's, they still do a fairly good job considering most Commodore 64 games normally look dull in comparison with CPC games. The game scored much nicer too when climbing to higher levels. The screen automatically panned upwards or downwards just so we got a good idea of what was going on around us, and it did this with a nice speed and with ease too. The one annoying issue here is that unlike the Amstrad and Spectrum 128K versions, we only had a choice of either music or sound effects here. As annoying as this, the music produced by the SID chip is absolutely fantastic and easily makes up for that. Yes, the enemy sprites here are fairly blocky, but not as blocky as some enemy sprites could be in C64 games. I also rank this version here as the Batmobile stages and swinging around lampposts seem much easier to control compared with other versions. The Batwing level when we're releasing gas-infested balloons from the carnival scored nicely too. It's really a case of swings and roundabouts with the 8-bit micro conversions of this game. Okay, so before we get on to the 16-bit micro versions, we're going to look at some other games here. So this is honorable mention, so we're starting off with the Game Boy original. So just like a few other versions of Batman, outside of the main Ocean releases, we had console exclusives, or in this case a portable exclusive. This is Batman for the original Game Boy, of course. This one released in 1990 by Sunsoft. It's pretty much a running gun game. It has some impressive music which doesn't resemble anything from the 1989 film at all, but the gameplay follows the film fairly closely. Stage 1 is the Axis chemical plant where we need to chase down Jack Napier, aka the Joker. It's a really cool game that I play on and off. Don't be fooled though, this is a tough game as we get further towards the end. By shooting blocks we can get power-ups, we even fly the Batwing in this version. This is a really cool portable version and I highly recommend this one. Batman for the Nintendo Entertainment System is likely one of the best platformers of its kind for this system. Again, this is old school Nintendo. Don't expect an easy ride with this game. This is known to be ridiculously tough. It loosely follows the film, but more or less it adds things that weren't in the film, such as the first boss, a rocket man that shoots down at you. At no point in the film did this character even exist. but it was likely added to give the game a little bit more substance, even if it does appear to be a little bit like Mega Man in that respect. Sunsoft, who also developed the Game Boy version, also did this one, and it released in 1990. Again, I highly recommend this game if you haven't played it. Whilst the other Batman games were doing the platforming or running gun style genre, Sunsoft decided to create an action maze style game which kind of looks like something from Bomberman. Originally this was supposed to be a standard platforming affair, but this is what PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16 users ended up getting. It's a simple case of shooting and bumping into enemies, which sends them spinning and collecting things to progress to later stages. A very strange game, but not particularly a really bad game, just different that is. Stage 1 takes us straight into what looks like the art gallery from the film rather than the Axis chemical plant, which is what many Batman games did. The Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis also had its own game of Batman, which, like everything here under honourable mentions, was an exclusive to this platform. It kind of reminds me of the NES game in ways, although obviously much nicer looking, since this is a 16-bit system after all. This game also released in 1990 and through to 1992 in different regions of the world. I highly recommend checking this one out. I am not sure how this one ranked in the day, but it's always been a favourite version of Batman for me. We also get to control the Batmobile and the Batwing in this game, so it's super cool stuff. Sadly, the arcade game was never ported over to anything, and it is a superb platform and beat-em-up game. This game released in 1991 by Atari, and I've always thought this could have been such a great console game. We have the Danny Elfman sound and music from the 1989 film, and the sound effects that are just awesome. We even have voice samples from the film used in this game. I often think that this arcade game is very much an underrated one. Nobody really seems to talk about it as a classic arcade game, that is. We even have awesome Batmobile stages, in which likely was an inspiration for Batman Returns for the Sega Mega CD, which came out a couple of years after. The IBM PC compatible release, although looks really nice, providing you had a higher spec IBM computer back in the day of course, mainly suffered from no music at all. Now the sound effects are embarrassingly awful for this release, where I would say even the shoddy MSX version would have been upgraded in that department. As with all the 16-bit computer versions, the lyrical stages are different and give us a different look altogether. Again, this looks acceptable enough here in this version, but dear lord, the sound is again just absolutely horrendous here. This could have been a different case if the Sound Blaster was a thing when this game released. This DOS version was also a much slower game compared to the next two versions. The Atari ST can often get slower versions of games. This can be seen in many of my arcade ports videos, but Batman the movie on this platform isn't as bad as some games have been. It's certainly an upgrade from the very poor MS-DOS version, that's for sure. I would say that this game is one of the better games for the Atari ST. Its pace and levels are very acceptable, but it really does the Atari ST some justice once getting to the racing segments of the game. The coders behind this clearly knew what they were doing with the ST. Sadly, this version, just like the Commodore 64 version, only had either in-game music or sound effects. The music here is very much Atari ST style in that it has the 8-bit sounds rather than the 16-bit sound. Yes, I was very impressed with this release. I had no choice to not actually put the Amiga version in first place here. Although the Atari ST game was great, the Amiga version looks so much nicer with the better use of colours too, in that it looks much brighter here. Some have speculated over on Lemon Amiga that this release could have easily been an Atari ST port rather than being coded from the ground up. Now that's just speculation of course and not a fact. If it is ported over from the Atari ST, then it's a really good port of the ST's version. Now, it's not just the visuals which are better here, but we get music as well as sound effects simultaneously in the game. And the music, especially the start screen music, ain't bad at all. It's certainly a major upgrade from the ST's 8-bit sound. When hitting enemies, the sound it produces is really good. It sounds very bassy almost. The Amiga version scrolls a little better too. The racing stages here also scroll better too. Now again, I will state that the ST version was great, but this just runs that little much better. I think in hindsight, was Batman the movie from Ocean actually a good game, or was it a case of playing it or wanting it at the time because of the hype over the film? Which version did you play? Did you play this on the C64? Did you have it on cartridge on the C64? Did you have it on cassette tape from the Hit Squad like I did? Which version would you have ranked in first place for the 8-bit versions or the 16-bit versions? As always, comment below and let us know. Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.